Đúng gì? Ok, vậy mình xin đứng lên đi, mình lại Phật ba lại. Okay, first bow, second bow, and third bow. Me too for. Please join your palms. Nam Mô Shakyamuni Ni Buddha. Nam Mô Shakyamuni Ni Buddha. Nam Mô Shakyamuni Ni Buddha. The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in hundreds of millions of eons. I now see and hear it, receive and uphold it, and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. Okay. We are at the last part in the Amida Sutra. The Buddha had finished speaking the sutra, Saripatra, with all bhikkhus, all gods, humans, and asurs in this world. Having heard what the Buddha said, rejoiced, believed, and accepted it. Okay, so we will explain what this means here for the gods, humans, and all beings of this world to rejoice, believe, and accept the Dharma. And at the end, they bowed in homage and withdrew from the assembly. Okay. So having heard the Buddha speak the sutra, so the word heard here means learn, recite, study, and meditate upon. Right? So when we say learned, it means heard. A learned person, based on the definition, is a person who has heard much. And this is because of the transmission from one person to the other. In this case, it was the transmission from the Buddha to the audience, to the disciples, to all the gods, and to all those in the assembly. And so that the truth may be realized. So the whole purpose of this transmission of the Dharma is that the recipient will be able to realize the truth. So this transmission here is of a high level of spiritual communication between the masters and the disciple. So when we observe the precepts, we study the scriptures, we gain doctrinal knowledge. Those things are important, but they are only means to an end. Right? They have to lead to spiritual and transcendental experience. In other words, the experience of enlightenment. So the transmission, the transfer of knowledge is a method to get us to the end, but that's not the end in itself. It has to lead to spiritual and transcendental experience. In the Nikaya Sutra, the Buddha laid out a conventional methods to get to enlightenment is through hearing, contemplating, and meditating. Right? Vang tu tu. So upon hearing, it's one way of gaining enlightenment. And then you contemplate, it's another way of gaining enlightenment. And then you meditate on it, that's another way of gaining enlightenment. So when we gain knowledge through learning or through hearing, of course, the word hearing is because of the ancient times. Now we don't just hear or listen, but we read as well. Literacy back in the ancient days was not a common thing. People learned by listening because the books were not readily available. Writing was not popular back then, but how people learned back then was through listening. So when we listen, we are learning. So in this case, using traditional way of explaining this method of learning is through hearing. So when we learn through hearing or studying, in this case, we gain knowledge from others, right? We have this transmission of knowledge from their person to us. So that's one way. So the difference between hearing, contemplating, meditation is as follows, right? Based on learning is to gain knowledge from others. Based on thinking or contemplating is knowledge gained by one's own cogitation, one's own learning, without having learned from others. So you look at nature, you contemplate, you think about it, and you gain knowledge from there. And the third is based on meditation, is knowledge that one has acquired through mental development, through the attainment of concentration, the attainment of samadhi, right? So through meditation. In this process that we are transforming intellectual understanding into transcendental wisdom. And wisdom here means learning. But before we get to wisdom, even though the ultimate goal is wisdom, and the learning is just a means in itself, does not mean that it is not important. It is still very important, because the way that we learn, the way that we discover our wisdom is through learning. And therefore, learning must precede any attempt to put into actual practice. If we know what it is, we understand the nature of things, that it helps us to put into practice. Because without that knowledge, then how can we gain enlightenment? Without that foundation. So therefore, we need to have a foundation, and that is learning, right? And meditation is not just only concentration, but it needs to lead to insight. And concentration is the fertile ground that allows wisdom to grow. So when we sit in meditation, it's not just about meditative joy, about feeling great, about feeling positive, about feeling calm, but it's about developing insight, that we see nature and its reality. For example, if we practice meditation, but it does not lead to insight, it will just be like a sharpened pencil given to a person who can neither read nor write, right? When we sit in meditation and we feel good, it may be beneficial for this lifetime, but then after this life, it becomes useless. Because it doesn't lead to enlightenment to help us be liberated from the cycle of life and death. So knowledge stops short at conceptual symbols. Wisdom passes beyond them. So we have to go beyond knowledge. We have to go beyond words and language to get to wisdom. But if we want to communicate what we have gained to others, then we need to go back to language, to symbols, in order to have that communication. Although wisdom surpasses language and symbols, but we still need to have language and symbols in order to communicate effectively to others, right? So symbols and language are important, but they are only means to an end, not ends in themselves. So how is wisdom developed? We talked about the three steps, the traditional steps: precepts, meditation, and wisdom. And wisdom you can gain from either learning, studying, hearing, contemplating, or meditating. But how is wisdom developed? Well, wisdom is developed when we can see reality. What does that mean? What does seeing reality means? Seeing reality has three characteristics, the Buddha tells us. And that is unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, and no self. Those are the three characteristics of reality. So that's one way of developing wisdom, is to see those three characteristics of reality. The second traditional method of gaining wisdom is to remove the first three fetters in order to enter the stream. And those three fetters are self-view, doubt, and attachment to precepts. Self-view is to see that this body exists, that's permanent, or something in nature exists and is permanent. And doubt here is to make a decision to commit to the path. And attachment to precept is to see observances and monastic ceremonies are ends in themselves, and to practice mechanically without understanding what the practice means. You just follow, and you don't really understand why you're doing things. Why are you part of the Dharma assembly, Pháp hội? Right? In the Dharma assembly, why do you participate in the Dharma assembly? We don't know, we just follow mechanically. And we think that will lead to enlightenment. So that's attachment to precepts. So until we break these three fetters, we will not be able to enter the stream. We will not be able to permanently shift ourselves from the conditioned to the unconditioned. So once we able to sever the three fetters, then we are entering the stream and we are beginning to develop wisdom. So the no self here, again, does not mean that things don't exist, but things do exist conditionally. And the no self here, and we do this to ourselves all the time. That is, when we don't recognize that change is possible, and we get settled down in what we have, and we want those things to exist forever on our behalf, then that is to see that things have a true, permanent, unchanging self. Therefore, we will not be able to enter the stream. Doubt here is, you say, well, yeah, that sounds really good. The Dharma sounds really good. The principles sounds really good, but I'll give it a try. You're not being committed to it, and that means that you are being bound by the fetter of doubt. Right? You have belief and you have doubt. You're not committing yourself unreservedly to the spiritual life. So that's doubt. There is some reservation for you to make that full commitment. So that's doubt. And for example, when you have doubt, is you see the stream, you see water, but you don't want to jump in because you're afraid that the water is too cold or the water is too deep. You have this fear, you're hesitant to jump in. I'm not saying that we should jump in like a fool and not knowing, but without making that commitment, we will not be able to enter the stream. Right? We will not be able to go with the stream. And so that's what entering the stream, blue, means, to enter the stream. And the third attachment to precepts is to take moral observances or precepts as ends in themselves. We practice mechanically, just going through the motion. And we sometimes we even see ourselves better than others because we observe the precepts better than other people. Right? So these three fetters will remain, and as long as they remain, we will be bound to fall back down to the cycle of life and death. And we'll continue this circle. We'll continue circling the cycle of life and death, luân hồi, like luân hồi. This wheel of life that we will not be able to escape from it, liberate from it. So and when we have developed, when we have wisdom, is that we start to have this transition from the unconditioned, from the conditioned to the unconditioned. And sometimes we do have this transition occurring when we have flashes of insight, like lightning in the dark night, when a lightning strike. Some say, when a lightning strike, you can see temporarily where things are, and then it goes dark again. So that's the start of the transition. And the more that we experience reality, the more that we're not being fearful of experiencing the reality, we will feel it more and more powerfully and decisively, the gravitational pull of the unconditioned. We will have less fear in going deeper and deeper into the stream. We will not have fear of the stream pulling us, but we are allowing ourselves to be pulled by the stream. If we have enlightenment, that means it's like the night is bright and we can see things very clearly. So when we practice, sometimes we do have flashes of insight and or flashes of lightning to allow us to see reality. And if we allow those flashes to occur more and more often, we will feel more comfortable in accepting it, in seeing reality, and accept and allow ourselves to be pulled by the unconditioned. Okay? So similarly, if we want to be reborn in Sukhavati, life has to be oriented in the directions of and moving irrevocably towards Sukhavati. So we have to live our lives as if we are already in Sukhavati. What that means is that our lives have to be filled with joyful faith, because without that joyful faith, we will not orient our lives in that direction. And of course, it doesn't mean that we become self-absorbed when it's all about us. I mean, although there is a rush to go to Sukhavati, but we don't go about stamping on those nearby, meaning that we don't neglect those nearby. When we are on our path to Sukhavati, we still care about those around us. So when we are orienting our life in the directions of Sukhavati, we are making that permanent shift from negativity to positivity, because the foundation of our momentum towards Sukhavati, cực lạc thế giới, to Sukhavati is joyful faith. So that is very positive. So if we have this positivity in us and we nourish it and allow it to grow, then we are orienting our life in the directions of Sukhavati. So because how we live our lives now is very much connected to how and where we're going to be. So how we live our life is a very good indication of where we will be. This is illustrated in the sutra in Dhammapada. There are two stories. In the Dhammapada, in one story, there was a lay disciple by the name of Damika. Damika was very fond of giving charity. He was very generous in giving food, offering foods to the monks and other prerequisites to the monk regularly. And he was also a leader of 500 virtuous lay disciples of the Buddha. When Damika was old, he became very ill and he was on his deathbed. And he asked that the Sangha come to recite a sutra for him. And the monks while the monks were reciting the sutra for Damika, Damika saw 6 decorated chariots from the celestial worlds inviting him to their respective worlds. Damika told his children about the 6 chariots waiting for him, and Damika eventually decided to go to the world of Tasita, trời đâu xuất. And that so he lived a life of generosity, a life of giving and caring for others. Therefore, his next life is a continuation of his good deeds. And he passed away and was reborn in the Tasita heaven. Ananda later on asked the Buddha where Damika was reborn. And the Buddha confirmed that, yes, indeed, he was reborn in the Tasita heavens. The Buddha says that he lived here among his kinsfolk, rejoicing because of his good merits, that he continues to enjoy his good karma in the afterlife. Right? So they that are hỷ phu, chánh niệm, bảo trì chánh niệm, rejoice in both places equally, now and tomorrow, now and the future. So how we live our life has close connections of where we will be. Of course, the other extremes in another example that the Buddha gave in the Dhammapada was about the pork butcher, Kunda. Even though he lived near the Buddha, within the vicinity of Buddha, but there was not a single day that that Kunda do him honor by offering the Buddha as so much as a handful of flowers or a spoonful of rice. And he didn't do a single work of merit. So Kunda was on the other extreme of the example compared to Damika. And unfortunately, one day he was ill with torment, with suffering, where his behavior changed according to his past evil deeds. And he grunted like a pig. He crawled on his hands and knees like a pig. And he kept crawling back and forth, grunting like a pig continually. Having suffered for a period of 7 days, he died and was reborn in the realms of suffering, the realms of hell. I mean, the monks said to the Buddha that they had never seen such a savage and a cruel being before, that who was killing pigs, thousands of pigs probably, right? Who was very cruel to animals. So the way he lived his life in cruelty was how his afterlife was. So there is a very strong connection between how we live our lives and our future lives. So the Buddha says that his past deeds have taken over him. The retribution of his past deeds has taken over him, and he suffered tremendously. He suffered not only in the present lifetime, but also in the realms of hell. That's why he grunted and squealed like a pig. Today he died and was reborn in hell. So having suffered thus in this world, he went again to a place of suffering and was there reborn in the realms of hell. So how we live our lives has very close connection to how we will be. It is popularly understood that a human might be able to reborn as an animal. But we should understand this a little bit deeper, because it depends on what we mean by a human being. So if you are by human being, we don't mean just the physical body of a human, but also the human consciousness. If we maintain the human consciousness, then it is unlikely that we will be reborn as an animal. On the other hand, if a person who has rudimentary human consciousness and his quality has degraded by unskillful actions, and he has a mental state that is much higher than an animal's, then it is very possible that he will be reborn as an animal. The author gave an example that when he was in Darjeeling in India, there was a Nepalese Buddhist, so-called Buddhist, but he was also a pig keeper, and he had a slaughterhouse to kill the pigs. And every night, there would be pigs screaming from the killing, long drawn-out scream, which seems to go on for minutes together. Right? Every night, he would be killing a pig. So he spent all his time with those pigs, and he really did look like a pig with his piggy features, piggy expressions, his piggy build with short legs and forearms. That made him look like a pig. So he was in close mental rapport with his pigs that one would find it easy to believe that he had been reborn as a pig. Especially as in the course of his life, he had slaughtered hundreds and thousands of pigs. So it depends on what we mean by a human being, right? A person who lives in the human body, but he intoxicates himself every day. He drowns himself in drinking to wipe out his truly human nature. Then he is molding his way to become an animal because he lives his life to be like an animal. Right? So leading a life without joyful faith towards Sukhavati, without cultivating the qualities like those of the Bodhisattvas in Sukhavati, then one is not easy to be reborn there. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is extremely difficult. Right? How we live our lives has close connections of where we will be. So if we live our lives with joyful faith and our yearning to be reborn in Sukhavati, then we are building that close connection to Sukhavati for us to be reborn into. Otherwise, if we live a life that is so different from Sukhavati, we just live to indulge, to enjoy, engage in worldly activities, and have no inkling of what Sukhavati is about, then we are not truly building that bridge for us to cross to Sukhavati. We're not building that connection for us to get to Sukhavati. So when we hear what to develop wisdom or to go to Sukhavati, that we need to live a life that supports that bridge to get to Sukhavati, cực lạc thế giới. So those, after they listen to the Buddha, they can believe in it, they have joy because they are orienting their lives in the directions of enlightenment. And the audience rejoiced for having heard the sutra on Sukhavati and Amitabha. They rejoice for one reason is that in the present lifetime, they are protected by all Buddhas in the 10 directions. You read other sutras, it talks about gods protecting the practitioners. Right? And then there's some other sutras about Bodhisattvas protecting the practitioners. But in this sutra, it is so special that it's not gods, it's not Bodhisattvas, but it's the Buddhas. Not only one Buddha, 2 Buddhas, or 3 Buddhas, but all the Buddhas in the 10 directions protecting the practitioner. So that's the current benefit. The future benefit is that the practitioner will be liberated from the cycle of life and death, and that he or she is destined for enlightenment. There's no falling back. So that's a benefit that we have of practicing the Pure Land method. When we know that we have such protection, whatever happens, we will not regress. If we continue to move forward, then there is joy in us. And because of that joy that we have, that allows us to make progress. And we should understand that the basic criterion for rebirth in Sukhavati is joyful faith. The overall basic criteria include joyful faith, cultivating good roots, merits, and good conditions. Thiện căn, phước đức, nhân duyên. Right? Those three. So once we develop faith, it's not just that, but we have to continue to cultivate good roots, merits, and good conditions. And those three things will reinforce our joyful faith. So in the course of our practice, we should constantly and incrementally, progressively cultivate good roots, merits, and good conditions. Otherwise, if we don't have joy, then it will be very difficult for us to overcome obstructions and negativity in us. And without overcoming obstruction and negativity, there will be no spiritual momentum, and therefore there will be no spiritual progress. So when we practice the Pure Land method and we have this joyful faith, we are putting ourselves in a very positive environment. In a book about Bodhisava ideal, it talks about Bodhisavas. Even though the Bodhisattva already has attained nirvana, but he continues to be in the samsara. It makes no difference for him, because to him, he does not distinguish between nirvana and samsara, and therefore it cannot hurt him. Being in the samsara cannot hurt him. And it explains why. The body is happy by means of merit. The mind is happy by means of learning. What can hurt the compassionate one as he remains in the realm of birth for the sake of others? So having obtained the chariot of the thought of enlightenment, bodhicitta, bodhitam, which removes all depressions and fatigue, going from happiness to happiness, who, that is intelligent, would be despondent. He would never be tired. He would never be depressed. He would not be in a negative state of mind, because he is filled with happiness. Right? If one is in the samsara, out of compassion, in one way, one does not really experience samsara as samsara, a luân hồi. So for us, rebirth in Sukhavati is a must. But in order to be liberated from the samsara, it is not by rushing to the, in order to be liberated by the samsara, it is not by rushing in about madly looking for Sukhavati, but we should lay the foundation, the conditions towards Sukhavati. Right? In other words, we have to transform our current consciousness from the foundation of negativity to the foundation of joyful faith or positivity. It is about building the bridge, connecting our current life to our future rebirth in Sukhavati. So, in other words, we should be living as if we are already in Sukhavati, cực lạc thế giới. Okay. And this requires us to transform ourselves beyond the lower evolution. Our lives consist of the lower evolution, but the whole process is there's a lower and there's a higher evolution. The lower evolution, as you can see, is very cyclic, where it goes around and around, and you can never escape from it. And that's what we call the samsara, the cycle of life and death. So that's what the lower evolution is. And there is a higher evolution where once you have escaped from or liberated from the lower cycle, the lower evolution, you are now in the spiral mode. You continue to grow indefinitely. So in the Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Kinh Bộ Tương ứng, the Buddha explains to the bhikkhus of the whole process, the whole evolution, and we can take the whole process and categorize into two cycles, two evolutions. One is the lower evolution, the other one is a higher evolution. The lower evolution is what we call the 12 nidanas, 12 nhân duyên, thập nhị nhân duyên. The first element, and it is not the first thing of the cycle, but it's fundamental enough where, for the sake of enumeration, that it starts with ignorance. Ignorance is a result of not being aware of the Dharma, and not understanding reality, and that one plunders along in existence. One gets stuck in this reactive mode based on sense data. Whatever that person sees, feels, hears, tastes, that it leads to wrong views and skillfulness. So you are always in this reactive mode where you react based on the data that you receive. So that's reactive mode. You just react emotionally. You get wrapped up emotionally. Something that agitates you, you get angry, and you don't understand. And sometimes you don't reflect why you are angry, but you get angry and you act in response to that unskillfully. So that's ignorance. Ignorance leads to formations, and this is formation means like willful actions or karma. Karma consists of three types, right? Action, speech, and mind. And formations are constructions that fix us into definite ways of being. Formations are our habits, our tendencies that make up our human personalities. It keeps us in a lane, and we keep going along in our familiar pattern of life. And so we continue that tendency, that habit. And that's what formation here means. The third link of this lower 12 link of the nidanas, 12 nhân duyên, of the lower evolution is consciousness. Consciousness is arisen dependent on a previous life. So consciousness here, you can think of an ego. It's kind of misleading, but I use a term that helps to understand, called soul. Right? This consciousness is ever looking for fresh pleasures to satisfy the ego, the me, the conscious ego. And it is a source of suffering because there is belief in the me, that belief in the conscious ego that really exists, that I really permanently exist behind my sense experiences. And that motivates me to look for another life, right? To transmigrate between lives. So that's consciousness. The next element is called name and form. And name and form here, they exist together. The interdependence of consciousness and name and form is taught in the Mahanidana Sutra and Nalakapla Piyo Sutra, where the two are interconnected And with the name and form, we believe that we are this body and this mind. And it is a source of suffering because we think that there is a permanent self that exists. And we cling unto it. And that is a source of suffering because we don't understand conditionality. And we don't understand why things happen. We want this body, this mind to exist forever. And that is a source of suffering because it leads to dissatisfaction. It leads to disappointment. When this body and mind change, we become disappointed because we expect our body and mind to remain, to remain as they are forever under our control. But things always change because in reality, they have no self. And because of that they change and they don't live up to our expectation. Okay. So then the next element of the 12 links is called six sense realms. All the experience that comes through, that comes to us, go through these 6 senses or gateways, right? Our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body for contact, for touch, and our mind, our memories, for example, can trigger our experience. So this is, and now we're building up the gateways for the floods of sense data to come through, to influence us. And because we now have the gateways for data, external data to come through, or even internal data to influence us, we have contact. Xúc, right? Xúc chạm, xúc. So contact is the basis for feeling, which is the next one. But contact here is the immediate present experience. And it is a matter of contact between consciousness and the world that we experience through the 6 senses. So because there is contact, because we have our senses that interact with data outside coming through the 6 gateways, and we have attention to that experience, that contact, and that's why we have this awareness of this contact. Now, this contact, this between consciousness and the world, this consciousness here is different from the term of, this is in terms of perceptions, how we see things. And it's not the same as consciousness that is part of the 3rd link. This consciousness here is referred to probably the 8 consciousness, the alaya. And it's not perception. Consciousness, part of contact, is perceptions, how we perceive things, the interactions between our senses and the data on the outside. When we have contact, it leads to feeling. And there are 3 possibilities. Whether the feeling can be pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent. And when there is feelings of pleasant or unpleasant, it leads to craving. Craving here can either be attraction or revulsion. You want to run away from it. But craving here is to nourish the reactive mind, to nourish our greed, anger, and delusion. And the result is that we are ever in this pursuit of satisfaction. We'll always continue to look for satisfaction whenever there is craving. And when there is craving, there is clinking, attachment. So holding on to sensual experience, views or beliefs or habits. And we become attached to things that are not really constant, that are always changing. And that's why it's a source of suffering, because we continue to chase after it, but we can never acquire it. So clinking here is the psychological tendency to mix our preferences into an organized sense of who we are, or at least what we think who we are, and believe that how the world should be like. So that's our perception of what the world is. And the 10th is the existence, this is a becoming. This is the start. This is the start of the new life. Right? That's becoming. And when there is becoming, then there is birth. And birth is literally is a birth of a baby. Right? And with birth, there is dukkha. It leads to dukkha. Dukkha represents old age and death. It is an inevitable consequence of birth. And if we get stuck here, we will reinforce our reactive mode to reinforce our greed, anger, and delusion, and the cycle continues. It reinforces our delusion. So this is where we cannot be liberated from the cycle of life and death, is that we get stuck in this cycle of the lower evolution. And this 12 links here describes the evolutions of the cycle of life and death, and we get stuck there in the lower evolution. So normally sentient beings get stuck here because of the reactive mode. We continue to reinforce that reaction, and it reinforces as a result our greed, anger, and delusion. But here's the key. If we can, when we experience dukkha and we understand from learning the Dharma to see things, how things have happened, then it helps us to break out of this cycle to get to the higher evolution, which is the faith. So in other words, when we experience dukkha and we have awareness of unsatisfactoriness, we see reality, then it gives rise to faith in us. And because we have this faith in the Dharma, that we go for refuge. We go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to the Sangha. And this is the start of the higher evolution, is faith. And faith here, it leads to joy, because we are glad, or we are delighted for having found a path leading to liberation. So that's joy, the feeling of having found a solution to our problem is joy. And if we continue on that path, it leads to rapture. Rapture is intense, thrilling, ecstatic rapture that pervades the body from head to toe, from head to foot. And the more intense it becomes, eventually we have to leave that behind in order to go to the next step, and that is tranquility, where the bodily joy starts to calm down, and we have a calmer sense of bodily serenity, where the body, it becomes more subtle, and it's not like crazy happy. Up here, we become very joyful, and we feel it in our body. But we have to overcome that and replace it with something that's calmer, something that's more subtle, that's more fine, and that's tranquility, is to let go. Like the feeling of you have it. It's not that you know it very well. It's not something that's newly acquired, but you understand it. You know that it's part of you, and so you're beginning to accept it. And when you can do that, the next element is bliss. Bliss here is inner happiness that starts to remove the 5 hindrances of sensual desire, ill will, sloth, and torpor, restlessness and anxiety, and doubt. These 3 hindrances will prevent us from entering meditation. Because if you have sensual desire, you will not be able to be content with what you have. You want to have more. If you have ill will, it is full of negativity, which does not jive with the positive experience in meditation. If you have sloth and torpor, then you're tired. You don't have energy to keep up with awareness, to maintain your awareness. And if you are restless and anxious, then you can never calm the mind down. Right? One is that you are too calm, too tired, that you cannot give rise to energy to maintain awareness. The other one is that you are too excited, too anxious, that you can never calm the mind down. And the fifth is doubt, where you don't make that commitment. You don't want to make that commitment to turn your life into one of spirituality. You're afraid of making a commitment, therefore it becomes a hindrance to enter deep meditation to experience bliss. So when you have removed the 5 hindrances, now you are providing the foundation for concentration or meditation to arise. Concentration here is the coming together of thought. It's the mental focus, uniting mental and emotional energies. And they all flow undistractedly into whatever that one is doing. So meditation here does not mean that one just sits quietly in a room. But here is that you can focus undistractedly into whatever that you're doing. Whether at work, at home, or outside, whatever that you engage in, you are completely focused. So that's concentration. It's universal, and it's not just sitting in one location, but you have this undistracted focus. In order to advance beyond concentration, it needs to lead to knowledge and vision of reality. When we get here, we will have direct, total insight into the human conditions or reality. And when we say reality, I'm not saying that it is apart from the conditioned existence, but it is to understand conditionality and to understand the 3 characteristics of the conditioned. So that's what reality means, that we see within the conditioned existence, that we see conditionality, and that we are able to break the 3 fetters that we just talked about: self-view, right, and attachment to precepts, observances of precepts, and doubt. So those 3 fetters need to be broken in order to enter the stream and in order to see reality. So it's not just intellectual understanding, but our heart has to move with it too. There was a story about a monk from India coming to China to preach the Dharma, and the king ceremoniously welcomed the monk into the palace. And after all that was done, the king asked the monk, "Tell me the essence of Buddhism." And the monk said it very simply: do no evil deeds, do all skillful deeds, and maintain the purity of the mind. And the king was kind of shocked, because he was expecting a deeper philosophy from the monk. He said to the monk, "This is so simple. Even an 8-year-old kid can understand it." The monk replied, "It's true that an 8-year-old kid can understand it, but an 80-year-old man cannot practice it, cannot put into practice." So when we have this knowledge or vision, it's not just intellectual, but we need to be able to put it into practice. So conditionality, we know that things occur based on condition. That is theoretical, very abstract, but it's a different matter once you put into practice. When you encounter situations that you can give rise to the understanding of conditionality, then you will be able to handle the situation. So whenever that you encounter situations that it causes you to have afflictions, worries, anxieties, then that means you do not have a good handle of conditionality. Right? We understand conditionality is when we can resolve problems without suffering, without dissatisfaction. So this is what knowledge and vision of reality means, is that we see true nature of things, that we see conditionality, and that we understand the three characteristics of the conditioned existence. When we can see it clearly, then we have this enchantment. This enchantment here is not a negative thing, but it is a consequence of insight, because one realizes how things are not dependable, constantly changing. Therefore, it is natural that one no longer wishes for mundane gratifications of desires. Therefore, one doesn't pursue it, because one knows that it does not lead to any lasting satisfaction. For example, when we were kids, we had toys to play with, right? We were very attached to our toys. But as we grew older, now that we are grown-ups, we don't see our toys as important anymore. So we can let go. We are disenchanted of the toy. It doesn't mean that we hate the toy. There's nothing negative about it, but we have outgrown our toys, right? So when we look at the reality, we start to see three kinds of suffering. That having this body is dissatisfaction, because if you don't take care of it, it will lead to dissatisfaction. There's illness, there's separation from loved ones, there's encountering with our foes and enemies, that those who we don't like. And that this body itself is the foundation for future suffering. So when we see that, we are no longer attracted to it. And at a higher level, we will realize that even if we go to the heavens, we will see that eventually pleasures will turn into dissatisfaction. The food that you like, you eat. When you're full, you no longer have the satisfaction for it. So the pleasure from eating diminishes, and it becomes dissatisfaction. Or even if you go to a higher level of heavens where they dwelt in meditation, they will realize that they have no control of their destiny, and therefore they are continue to be in this transitory state without their control. They don't know where the next state of being will be, the next life will be. Therefore, it leads to dissatisfaction, because they don't have control. They want control, but they don't have control. So whether from the realm that is very coarse to the very fine, there is no control. It leads to dissatisfaction. So whether you have a human life or the heaven life, and enjoying heavenly bliss or meditative bliss, deep meditative bliss, there is no lasting satisfaction. And because of that, there is disenchantment of the three realms. When there is disenchantment, it leads to dispassion. Dispassion here is a state of detachment, relinquishment. You become undisturbed, unperturbed. And this does not mean that this state of being is incompatible with compassion for beings. But it means that with this state, that you are no longer caught up emotionally. You keep a broad perspective. So this is not a negative state, This is not being cold or emotional or being antisocial, but you have compassion for other beings, but you don't take advantage of others emotionally, right? You don't prey on their dependency. There are relationships in this world that people treat each other nice because they take advantage, they know that they can take advantage of others emotionally. And you can see this very clearly in the political realms, right? They treat each other nice because there is a benefit in treating the others nice. But this is not how this state of being is. Is that this dispassion is that yes, you have compassion too, but there is no taking advantage of others emotionally. The next level is liberation. The next element is liberation. And this liberation here is the release or complete spiritual freedom. Your heart and your mind are free from craving, anger, and delusion. You're free from this reactive mode of operation. But in fact, you are in full creative mode. What this means is that you are no longer reacting to the data that you receive, but you are aware of your behavior and you do not allow unskillfulness to arise in you. So because you don't have this, because you have this skillfulness and you don't create unskillfulness, that you are no longer bounded by unskillfulness. You are no longer in this reactive mode that you just follow along without understanding why you behave that way, and without knowing the consequences of your behavior. So this liberation here is that you're in complete control. You know the conditions that will lead to what consequences. But that's not all. The last step, it has to lead to knowledge. And this is knowledge about destruction. This destruction is the destruction of all mental defilements, destroying all the pollutants of desire for sensual pleasure or any form of existence like materialism, existentialism, or spiritual ignorance, nihilism. So one is to wish for forever existence. The other one is to end existence because there's too much suffering. They believe that as long as you have consciousness, you can never alleviate suffering. So the one, because you continue to receive data, so as long as their consciousness, perceptual consciousness, then there will continue to have suffering. So that is spiritual ignorance because they don't want to have this consciousness of anything. So that's defilement. So with the knowledge about destruction, one knows that one is liberated and that one is no longer having the mental defilements to delude oneself. So that is the basis of the higher evolution. So until let's go back here, when we have contact, when our senses interact with data, and we have feelings, craving, and eventually leads to dukkha, dissatisfaction, if we don't recognize reality, we don't have awareness of reality, then we continue to be stuck in this realm, the cycle of life and death. But when we have awareness, then it leads to faith and all the way to wisdom. So those in the assembly who, having heard the Buddha, they have joy because they recognize reality and that they evolved from the lower evolution to a higher evolution where they continue to grow spirally upward, as opposed to in a cycle that you continue to be stuck in the cycle of life and death, right? Dukkha reinforces ignorance, and then it reinforces dukkha. As opposed to you've seen it, you have faith because you have found your way out. It continues to spiral upward towards liberation, towards wisdom. So when they make that transition from the lower evolution to a higher evolution, they are depending on the three jewels, right? They take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and they have found their way because that's when they have joy. So but what does it mean to take refuges in the three jewels? Well, this is significant because taking refuges in the three jewels is a start on the higher evolution. As we mentioned, the lower evolution is very reactive. It can be spiritually positive, but it's still mundane. And this lower evolution describes everything about our entire life, our history. You see how things progress, and then got interrupted by regression, and then it progressed again, and then it got interrupted again by regressions. So you continue to be in this cycle of a build-up, relapse, decline, and total destruction. And that's what is describing our lower evolution of life. But for the higher evolution, it is transcendental, where you're no longer reactive to opposites, but you are spiraling forward indefinitely. And this transition here marks this transitions from the lower to a higher evolution is what we traditionally call stream entry, nyaplu. This is the point of no return, the continuous progress, where there's an upward surge of the individual in us, the emergence of the spiritual process within the cyclical evolution, the lower evolution. Within the lower evolution, you emerge from it to get to the higher evolution. And this is the manifestations of the transcendental within the mundane realm. For example, we live in this life. We are living a mundane life, but within that mundane life is the transcendental. Just like the lotus flower growing in water and blooming in water. So water represents life. Life is what we call samsara, the cycle of life and death. And from there, that it is a transformation, not escapism, but there's a transformation where the lotus flower starting from the buds inside the water starts to grow beyond the water. So without water, there is no lotus flower. Without lotus flower, there is no growth. So without life, there is no transformation. And without conditionality, there is no potential for change, no transcendence. So when we take refuge, we are growing outside of this. We're starting from this samsara, and we're growing, transforming ourselves into the transcendence. So this higher evolution is not something that and separate from the lower evolution. But in other words, the life that we have, we just don't escape, right, to find something, but we start with what we have and we work our way out. We become more aware of the things around us. We don't become reactive to the data we receive through our nose, our eyes, our ears. Things that we see that we don't like, we react. Or things that we like, we react. But we are creative in maintaining that awareness. So by taking the three refuges, we are essentially saying that the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha have the highest spiritual value. They are supreme. That they are transcendental, Because if we regard anything else that's higher than the Buddha, then there's no Buddha refuge for us. Even if we admire the Buddha, but we are not a Buddhist unless we see the Buddha as the highest embodiment of the spiritual ideal. The same with Dharma. Right? If we study other texts, if we see that other texts are higher than the Dharma, then there is no Dharma refuge. So Buddha's attitude is not a narrow one, but very pragmatic, very realistic, because we are not here concerned with matters of abstract theory, but with more authentic, heartfelt, living spiritual practice. In the spiritual life, one of the most important elements is devotion. And because devotion is what provides that driving power to get to our goal, it's what propels us towards. For example, we have this intellect. Intellect is like a motor car, it's like a car. But a car without fuel, you will not be able to move to get to the destination. So similarly, if we only understand the philosophies, we only have this intellectual knowledge, and it is just very abstract. There's no emotion about it. There's no devotion about it. Without devotion, without faith, then there can never be progress. Because you learn, you understand it, but you're not convinced that it is good for you. So therefore, you won't put your bets in it. So devotion flows most easily towards a person, something that we can relate to, a personified embodiment of the ideal that we want to reach. So we cannot be deeply devoted to multiple spiritual ideals simultaneously. We need to pick one to have our devotion in order to be convinced fully. Otherwise, we'll be pulled in different directions if those ideals that we have devotion for represent different things. So it must be fixed on just one figure, the one which we consider to be the highest. That's why in Pure Land Buddhism, that one takes refuge in Amitabha, in place of Shakyamuni Buddha, and one takes refuge in the Pure Land Sutras in place of all the sutras for Dharma, and that one takes refuge in Sukhavati in place of the Sangha, the general Sangha. So for Pure Land Buddhism, we take refuge in Amitabha, the Pure Land Sutras, and Sukhavati to be the Sangha. In Sanskrit, the term faith or devotion comes from a root which means to place the heart. So if we have devotion, we are placing our heart, our trust in it, when our whole being can move forward in unison. So when we go for refuge for the Sangha, it is also necessary to go for refuge to the Buddha and the Dharma, and likewise. Since when we have a common spiritual goal, going for refuge, tam quy y tam bảo, quy y Phật, quy y Pháp, quy y Tăng. So when we take refuge when we have common refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma, then it's very natural for us to come together into a spiritual community, because it naturally draws us together. But what does it mean for us to be together in a Sangha? It doesn't mean just physical proximity. Sitting together in a congregation, that's not enough to be called a Sangha. But it is more of communication. When we have the same goal, the same aspiration, we communicate. But what does that mean to communicate? Well, communication is really spiritual responsiveness, that we understand each other, we empathize each other. It's not only physical proximity, but what's more important is communication. We interact with others. We inspire each other. If in the interactions where it leads to frustration and disappointment, where it is inspiring or meaningless, then we're not using the medium of communication effectively. There is no communication. Effective communication should lead to aspiration, inspiration, joy. So that's mutual responsiveness on the basis of a common ideal and a common principle. And that's what a Sangha means, is that we communicate, we understand each other. Traditional explanations of a Sangha is the representations, or is characterized by the 6 harmonies, Lục Hòa Kính, where we share common views and common understanding. We share common rules and practice. We share common dwelling. This could be physical proximity. If we are in physical proximity where we stay together, it should lead to harmony, and that we have this beneficial speech here that should result in merits, virtues, right? Whenever we say something, it should generate merits. And that we share common ideas or common ideals, and that we share common equity. Whatever we have, we share equally. Now, equal here doesn't mean that it is equal across the board in terms of number, but depends on the need. A person who needs more should get more. A person who needs less should get less. So equal is to have this equality in terms of needs and not just numbers. So when we go for refuge to the Sangha on the basis of common devotions to the Buddha and the Dharma, then we explore together a spiritual dimension that is called a Sangha. But at some point, as we continue to elevate and transcend the mundane realm, it goes beyond distinctions between. We go beyond distinctions where there's no differentiation. So that's really on the transcendental element, transcendental plane, that there are no distinctions between you and I. So going for refuge is not just a matter of conversion, but just a mundane conversion. But there is a conversion in a sense that we're going from ordinary, mundane way of life to a spiritual and transcendental way of life, right? There is a transition from limited ideals to an absolute and transcendental ideal, from meaningless worldly contact to meaningful communication. So when we go for the 3 refuges, to the Buddha refuge, to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dhamma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go, we should be reminded of enlightenment, of truth and harmony or purity. So taking refuges in the 3 jewels is not just lip service, but it should bring about the transformation in the deepest seat of our consciousness. And this is not something that occurs a short period of time, but it is a build-up over a period of months, weeks, and even years, at a level that we do not usually function. So at a very deep level of ourselves. There are 4 levels of going for refuge. One is provisional, going for refuge, where one is not really serious about it, but has the potential of going for refuge, where there can be misunderstanding of what going for refuge means. The Buddha, during his time, criticized the Brahmins of his day for thinking that one could be reborn as a Brahmin, but then the Buddha says, no, you are a Brahmin because of your behavior, of your consciousness, of your righteousness, not because you are born as a Brahmin. So same thing here, that we cannot say we are born Buddhist. To be a Buddhist is to go for the 3 refuges and to observe the 5 precepts. So provisional means that you have potential to go for refuge. The next level is effective going for refuge, where you have conscious commitment, but it's not strong enough to break the 3 fetters, to enter the stream. The third is, but because at this level you can still regress, right? Fall back, 退轉, you can still regress. The third level is real going for refuge, where you can no longer fall back. There is a permanent shift from the conditioned existence to the unconditioned. That's you have already entered the stream. And then the fourth level is absolute going for refuge, where there is really no going for refuge because you have already attained enlightenment. You yourself are the Buddha, right? You and the Buddha are the same, so there is no going for refuge. So going for refuge, we should understand that it is not out of fear that we should seek refuge, protections from other things, but we go for refuge to the Buddha because we understand that it has the highest value, that it can solve our problems. And because when we are truly going for refuge and we have attained our goal, then one is released from all suffering. And then lastly, the audience in the assembly, they were able to maintain the joy, and that is because their whole being are in one direction, right? They have a meditative mind. How we maintain our joy is because of meditative mind, because a meditative mind has a lot of mental strength. In order to maintain it, you need to have mental strength in order to have a meditative mind, in order to maintain your joy. So again, we explained that samadhi is not something that you just sit in one place, but you are able to focus on whatever that you are doing, not in a forcible way or artificial way, but it should be natural. So for this to occur, it's not enough to force your mind to focus for 1 hour or half an hour or whatever for a period of time, if the rest of your life is pulling in the opposite direction. If 99% of your life oriented towards the mundane, the 1% that you have in the spiritual direction is not of much use. I mean, there is some use, but it's not going to be effective. It's like a rubber band. You pull it, you stretch it, but as long as you let go, it bounces back. It snaps back. So that's not going to help. You want your change to be permanent, where without it becomes a part of you, that you don't have to force your mind to be meditative in order to maintain your joy. But joy should be a natural part of your being. And that's how you maintain your joy. Okay. So at the end, they prostrated to the Buddha, and this prostration is an expression of gratitude. Right? And there is no better gratitude than to share what you have learned with others, especially the Dharma. When you transmit and you share the Dharma with others, that is the highest expressions of gratitude. So gratitude here, it should be in everything that we do, and it's the factor that generates merits. When we give to others, we give with gratitude. That's what generates merits. But if we give in a condescending way or in a very calculating way without gratitude, then it does not generate merit. And then after that, they retreated from the assembly to practice as learned, or as heard. So the real benefits in Buddhism is to apply it in our daily lives, because this helps to reinforce the orientation towards the spiritual life and liberation. If we learn, but we don't practice it, we don't incorporate it, we don't orient our lives in that spiritual direction, then it will not last. Just like the rubber band, as long as we let go, it snaps back. It goes back to its original self. So whatever we learn that we don't incorporate into practice, then it just leads to, it does not get us to anywhere. Okay, so let's summarize what we just talked about. The audience in the sutras, after having heard the Buddha speak, they rejoiced, believed, and accepted, and that they, and the way that they did that was they reorient their whole being in directions of enlightenment. So we too, after we haven't heard the sutra, haven't learned of the sutra, that we should orient our entire being in the directions of and walk towards enlightenment. We learned that should, by learning, in order to have it effective, we should transform ourselves and converting our perceptual consciousness into wisdom, and to have this permanent shift towards the unconditioned. And the expression of gratitude here should mean to share with others. And that's the best way to express our gratitude to the Buddha. And this will help us to avoid regressing to individualism, where we worry about our own liberation. So when we share with others, we are hoping that others will also be liberated and benefit from the Dharma. Okay, we will stop here and we will continue next time.